Gennady Golovkin is my favourite fighter of all time. I first saw Golovkin when he knocked out Juan Simon, a low-level opponent in a practically empty arena, and since then I've watched every fight he's had. In his prime, Golovkin was an absolute fighting machine, a thunderous puncher who went on a huge knockout streak, defending his middleweight title over 20 times before finally getting the big fights. Golovkin has been a huge inspiration to my own boxing style and career, and here is what made Gennady Golovkin such a great fighter. Golovkin was an incredible amateur boxer with an unbelievable record of 345 wins to just 5 defeats. He won multiple titles as an amateur, including an Olympic silver medal. During this time, Golovkin's style was more suited to amateur boxing. He had more of the traditional Soviet style, a style where you're more on your toes and you throw looping hooks with the knuckle facing down. We still see aspects of this style in Golovkin's professional career, but Golovkin's coach Abel Sanchez transitioned his style more to a front-footed Mexican-based style, a style very similar to that of Julio Cesar Chavez, and the decision to add this to Golovkin's game is what made him a complete fighter. Firstly, Golovkin's footwork is impeccable and is one of the main reasons he's able to control his opponents. He truly is a master at cutting off the ring. He keeps a distance from his opponents where he's out of range, but he's still close enough to put them under pressure. And instead of following his opponents around, he anticipates where they're going to go and blocks off their escapes, eventually trapping them against the ropes or in a corner. Golovkin is incredibly relaxed and burns little energy when stalking his opponents. And being under that intense, clinical pressure wears his opponents out very quickly. He also has an incredible jab, which not only dictates the course of the fight, but pushes his opponents back. Golovkin uses his power jab on the front foot to push his opponents back. And because his balance is so good, he's even able to counter his opponents whilst he's on the aggressive. This makes a retreating opponent shell up even more, which gives Golovkin a way in to do his work. And he's got very heavy hands, with his jabs even dropping multiple opponents. But Golovkin's jab is also diverse and sometimes subtle. He uses it as a way to distract his opponents to create spaces elsewhere for punching opportunities. And ultimately that jab gets him in range to land his damaging shots. But even when his opponents are at long distance, Golovkin can quickly close that distance by shifting. Shifting is an underutilized footwork tool in which you switch stances mid-combination, shifting the weight between your legs. Not only can it be a good way to close the gap against a retreating fighter, but it can also give you new angles to land your punches. And once he's closed that gap, his balance is so good that he's able to put his weight behind every shot and perfectly place them. And one thing I've heard most opponents say they were most surprised about when they faced Golovkin was his subtle and crafty ways to set up his power shots. Whenever he lands a power shot, it's always well set up, whether that's by tapping somewhere else to create the opening or by throwing loopy shots from incredibly odd angles. Golovkin's shots are always hard to read. And when he has his opponents hurt, he's relentless, which is why he's such a good finisher. When a hurt opponent wants to clinch, he'll control them with his head and yank his arms out. This gives his opponents no room to breathe and allows him to continue the intense pressure. And that pressure seems to be never ending. Golovkin's fitness in his prime was absolutely insane, and he seemed to throw more punches as the fight went on.
Golovkin closed the show, landing 56 of 101 power shots in that round.
But none of this is any good if your opponent can just hit you at will, and I think one of the most underrated aspects of his game was his defence. Up close he was an absolute master at making shots miss by twisting his body and covering his chin with his shoulder. This would allow him to maintain the pressure, stay in the range of where he's dangerous without taking any damage. And even if you are able to catch him, he has one of the all-time great chins. In over 400 fights as an amateur and a professional, he's never been dropped or seemingly hurt with a headshot. And all of these things combined with his destructive punching power is what made him such a great fighter in his prime and why he was so avoided. Golovkin will go down as one of the most dominant middleweights of all time, but I think it's a real shame that we never got to see him in the big fights when he was in his absolute peak. I think Golovkin was the best middleweight in the world during his prime, and victories over the top middleweights of that time would have cemented him as an all-time great. And that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed the content, make sure you like, subscribe and drop a comment, and feel free to follow me on TikTok and Instagram.